What does it take for someone who's sworn to protect life to become the very force that destroys it? How does a man in uniform, a figure society is taught to trust, transform into a predator hiding in plain sight? This is not just a story of murder. It's a story of a fractured psyche, of a man who wore two faces, one for the world and one for his victims. Mikhail Popkov was a decorated police officer, a husband, a father, a symbol of law and order in his community. But behind the badge, he carried a darkness few could ever imagine. Over the span of nearly 2 decades, Popkov brutally murdered at least 78 women, though he later claimed the number could be over 200. His victims were often selected for reasons that reveal something chilling about his mind. Women he judged as immoral, women he believed deserved punishment in his twisted sense of order. This isn't just about what he did, it's about how he hid it and why. Have you ever wondered what truly drives a mind like this? Stay with me. The truths we are about to uncover go deeper than you might expect. Because understanding someone like Mikhail Popkov forces us to confront a disturbing question. How close is the face of safety to the heart of darkness? Let's begin by understanding the world that unknowingly lived under the shadow of this double life. A community like Angarsk, tucked away in Siberia, trusted its officers. They believed in the uniform, in the badge, in the illusion of safety it represented. But while families went about their daily lives, while women walked home under the quiet assumption of protection, Mikhail Popkov was watching, calculating, waiting. His role as a police officer didn't just grant him access, it granted him invisibility. His victims never saw the threat coming. After all, who would fear the very person tasked with defending them? This is the unsettling territory where psychology collides with reality, because to understand how someone lives a double life for nearly 18 years, evading suspicion while committing acts of extreme violence, we have to confront the fragile boundaries between control and chaos, between the person someone appears to be and the mind they truly inhabit. And if you value this kind of deep psychological exploration, where we focus on understanding, not sensationalizing, consider supporting Criminal Psychology Unmasked with a like. It truly helps us continue bringing serious, respectful analysis of the criminal mind to the surface. Also, take a moment to check if you're already subscribed to Criminal Psychology Unmasked. This space exists for those who believe that questioning, not judging, is the path to understanding. Because what we're about to explore goes beyond headlines, beyond horror. It's about the mechanisms that allowed this duality to survive for so long, unnoticed, unchecked, and devastatingly effective. Let's step into the world that unknowingly lived under the shadow of a killer wearing a badge. In the quiet industrial town of Angarsk, Russia, life followed predictable rhythms. Families went to work, children walked to school, and the local police were seen not just as law enforcers, but as guardians of the community's fragile sense of safety. Among them stood Mikhail Popkov, a man whose polished uniform reflected the trust of an entire town. He was a disciplined officer, a seemingly devoted husband and a father. His colleagues described him as reliable, methodical, always ready to take on extra shifts. No one suspected that behind this carefully maintained identity was a truth so grotesque it would fracture the town's perception of reality forever. Between 1992 and 2010, a chilling pattern began to emerge, but only in hindsight. Women, often alone at night, began disappearing. Some were last seen accepting a ride from a police vehicle, trusting that the badge symbolized safety. Their bodies would later be discovered in remote wooded areas, mutilated, violated, left as silent witnesses to a mind unraveling beneath a mask of authority. During his trial, Popkov offered a haunting glimpse into his mindset, stating, "I wanted to cleanse the streets of women who behaved immorally." His words weren't of a man in remorse, but of someone who had crafted a twisted moral code, one that fused misogyny with a delusional sense of duty. Witnesses recalled how he would return home from his night shifts composed, indifferent, sometimes bringing flowers to his wife, as if the double life he lived required no reconciliation within his own mind. This wasn't just a transformation, it was the systematic construction of an identity split between protector and predator. And as the town remained unaware, the truth hid in plain sight, growing darker with every passing year. If this analysis sparked something inside you, leave in the comments. There's always a hidden layer. Behind Mikhail Popkov's calculated violence was not merely a desire to kill, it was a compulsion to exert control, to dominate, to punish. His crimes were not random acts of brutality, they were meticulously framed within a delusional moral structure. During one of his interrogations, he coldly stated, "I saw myself as cleaning the city. These women, they were not worthy of respect." Boom! This wasn't the voice of impulse. It was the voice of a man who had constructed an internal courtroom where he was judge, jury, and executioner. His victims were often women who, in his perception, violated a strict, archaic code of female behavior. Women who drank, women who stayed out late, women who, in his fractured worldview, symbolized moral decay. But what's deeply revealing is how his role as a police officer didn't just facilitate the logistics of his crimes, it psychologically legitimized them in his mind. The badge wasn't just a tool, it was a symbol of righteous power twisted into something monstrous. Court records describe how Popkov often used his patrol car to lure women, offering them rides under the pretense of safety. One surviving victim recounted that he spoke to her with the exact tone of an officer issuing a warning, calm, authoritative, disturbingly routine, right before attacking her. This reveals not just a predator, but someone whose identity had fully merged with his own corruption of authority. What we witness here is the collapse of ethical boundaries, when power, misogyny, and control intertwine without accountability. His mental transformation wasn't sudden. It was a gradual erosion of empathy, reinforced by years of internalizing the belief that his victims were somehow deserving. This is the psychology of control, where the uniform becomes both camouflage and weapon. What's perhaps most unsettling about Mikhail Popkov's journey into darkness is how effortlessly he maintained his double life. The same hands that placed medals on his police uniform were the ones that inflicted unspeakable harm. He would return home after a night of murder, greet his wife with the same routine warmth, share breakfast with his daughter, and prepare for his next shift, as if nothing had happened. His colleagues described him as reliable, even exemplary, someone who often volunteered for overtime, particularly night patrols. But those shifts were not always about protecting the city. They became the perfect cover for a different kind of hunt. Psychologically, the mechanisms behind this dual existence speak to a profound and dangerous form of compartmentalization. Popkov wasn't in constant conflict with his actions. Instead, he constructed psychological walls so rigid that his roles as a father, husband, officer, and predator never collided, at least not in his own mind. One investigator later noted in court transcripts, there was no visible strain in his behavior. He attended family gatherings, helped neighbors, and laughed like any ordinary man. This wasn't merely deception toward others, it was a deception of self, sustained over nearly 2 decades. His identity as a police officer didn't just enable him logistically, it reinforced his distorted self-perception as someone carrying out a form of twisted justice. In his own words, during interrogation, he admitted, "I felt no guilt. It was necessary." The impact of this revelation sends a chilling reminder of how cognitive dissonance can be weaponized when moral boundaries are entirely self-assigned. Behind closed doors and beneath the badge, Popkov's mind thrived in a reality where empathy was not absent, it was irrelevant. For nearly 2 decades, Mikhail Popkov's double life remained perfectly intact until the cracks began to form. The same badge that once protected him from suspicion could no longer shield him from the advances of forensic science. In 2012, a nationwide initiative was launched to collect DNA samples from current and former police officers, an unprecedented step driven by years of dead ends and mounting frustration. It was a simple swab, nothing more. But when his DNA matched biological evidence recovered from multiple crime scenes, the carefully constructed facade shattered instantly. His arrest sent a seismic shock through Angarsk and quickly reverberated far beyond Russia's borders. Headlines around the world carried the same chilling message. A police officer, a father, a neighbor had secretly become one of the most prolific serial killers in modern history. During his trial, the courtroom listened in stunned silence as Popkov admitted with alarming composure, "I did it for my own satisfaction. It was a desire, a need." There was no remorse in his tone, only a clinical acknowledgement of his actions, as though describing an ordinary task. The community that once saw him as a figure of safety was now left grappling with the horrifying reality that the predator had always been among them. Wearing a uniform, smiling at neighbors, attending local celebrations. Survivors and families of victims spoke of a betrayal so profound that it fractured their trust, not only in individuals, but in the very institutions meant to protect them. This was not just the fall of a man. It was the collapse of an illusion, a brutal revelation that beneath the surface of ordinary life can reside truths far darker than most are prepared to confront. When we step back from the forensic evidence, the courtroom testimonies, and the catalogue of horrific crimes, what remains is a far more unsettling question, one that extends beyond Mikhail Popkov himself. What does his mind reveal about the fragile architecture of human identity, about the capacity for darkness that can exist within roles society holds sacred? This wasn't a man who lived on the fringes, visibly broken or detached from reality. His transformation happened behind the closed doors of his own psyche, undetectable to those around him until it was far too late. The very mechanisms that allowed Popkov to function, the ability to split his identity between protector and predator, reflect a terrifying truth about cognitive dissonance. When a person's internal narrative becomes strong enough, even the most grotesque actions can be justified within their private logic. His own words during a psychological assessment are chilling in their clarity. There was no conflict. There was duty and there was desire. Both had their place. That sentence alone forces a deeper reflection on how thin the line truly is between structure and chaos, between what is publicly performed and privately concealed. Societal roles, the badge, the uniform, the family man, became not only his camouflage, but part of the script that validated his inner pathology. The mental journey he constructed wasn't a collapse into madness. It was a deliberate, methodical realignment of morals, one where power, misogyny, and control became his guiding principles. And this is perhaps the most uncomfortable revelation of all. That darkness doesn't always scream from the shadows. Sometimes it wears the quiet face of normalcy, patiently waiting, perfectly hidden within the very systems designed to hold it at bay. Mikhail Popkov's story doesn't end with his conviction, nor with the life sentence handed down inside a Russian courtroom. Because while justice may have finally drawn a boundary around his physical existence, the psychological aftermath continues to ripple far beyond the prison walls. His transformation from protector to predator, from officer to executioner, forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth, that the capacity for darkness isn't an external anomaly. It's something far more intimate, something that can inhabit the ordinary, the trusted, and the familiar. During sentencing, when asked if he regretted his actions, his response was chilling in its simplicity. "No, I was doing what needed to be done." A sentence so devoid of conflict that it strips away the illusion that such individuals are simply broken or insane. Instead, it reveals a mind that didn't collapse under the weight of guilt, but was instead rebuilt under the architecture of its own corrupted logic. The greatest impact of this case may not be found in the gruesome details of his crimes, but in the mirror it holds up to society. How often do we mistake compliance for goodness? How easily does a badge, a uniform, a smile override our deeper instincts to question what we do not see? The truth is, Popkov's darkness thrived not just because of his deception, but because of the collective blind spots around him. And that's the most disturbing revelation of all, that sometimes the shadows we fear the most are the ones we are conditioned not to look at. This is the truth we are left to sit with, a truth that doesn't offer closure, only the weight of understanding. And as we close this chapter, the questions left behind feel heavier than the answers. Because when we look at the story of Mikhail Popkov, what truly lingers isn't just the horror of what he did, but the haunting realization of how invisible his transformation was to everyone around him. His crimes weren't committed in the shadows of society's margins, but in its center, woven into the fabric of daily life, concealed behind the face of order, discipline, and trust. This case forces us to confront something deeply uncomfortable about the human condition. How do we reconcile the fact that evil doesn't always come wrapped in chaos, but can hide within structure, routine, and even a smile? His identity wasn't fractured by accident. It was consciously shaped. A man who simultaneously enforced the law while deciding, privately and with terrifying certainty, which lives deserve to be erased. If reflections like this resonate with you, if you believe that peeling back the layers of the criminal mind offers more than just curiosity, but a deeper understanding of human nature itself, I invite you to be part of this journey. Check if you're already subscribed to Criminal Psychology Unmasked. Here we don't sensationalize, we don't simplify. We examine, question, and seek to understand what most prefer not to look at. Supporting this type of serious psychological inquiry is simple. A like lets the platform know that you value depth over spectacle, and I encourage you to take it one step further. Leave a comment below with the words, "There's always a deeper origin," because the patterns we see on the surface are never the full story. They are echoes of something far older, far more hidden. But even the darkest patterns we observe today didn't emerge by chance. Every distorted thought, every fractured emotion has roots that stretch deep into the past. In the next episode, we'll step back into the early chapters of this story to uncover how this mind was shaped layer by layer. I'll be waiting for you in the next video.